What's going on, everybody? Hockey Time here, back for yet another tier list. Today, we're going to run through all 32 teams' goaltending tandems. This is probably my favorite preseason video to make. I'm a goalie myself, for those of you that watch the YouTube videos, of course. So, really like talking about whatever team's got between the pipes and where I think it stands relative to one another. I will say, I appreciate everyone that makes these tier maker templates, but this one drives me up a wall. It's alphabetized by the team name instead of the team location. So, this is a correct order technically, but I opened this and I almost had a seizure. Nonetheless, we're going to get started with the Avalanche tiers: elite, great, good, fine, inconsistent, and bad. And I'm kind of just going at this at a first glance. I haven't really taken notes. I don't have stats, just going off of performance last year, the years previous. Try not to be too heavily recency biased, but obviously running most heavily with last year's results. So the Avs, kind of an interesting one. Alex Georgiev 2 years ago was great for the Avs. Last year, not nearly as good. Justus Sandinen came in at the end of the year and had a pretty good stretch at the end. So I think for now they are going to go in good. I would anticipate at least a bit of a bounce back from Georgiev, and if not, again, they do have Annunen, who proved at the end of the season to be a pretty solid backup if he can continue that trend. The Chicago Blackhawks, they have now Peter Mrazek and Laurent Brossoit as their tandem. I think this probably goes in fine. Mrazek, despite his stats not looking all that great, actually had a really good year last year considering the team in front of him. And Laurent Brossoit, one of the Jennings winners with Connor Hellebuck, of course, getting traded over to, signing in Chicago to be the kind of 1B there, I would expect. I think they'll be okay. They're still going to have their work cut out for them on this team, but it's definitely an upgrade from Mrazek and Soderblom, which is what the Blackhawks had last year. Columbus, they still have Merzlikins and Tarasov's probably going to be the duo there. Jet Greaves will get time as he did last year as well. This one for now, though, does just go in bad. I love Elvis Merzlikins. I hope he turns it around and starts performing like he is capable of this season, but the last few years have just not been enough from him or from Greaves or from Tarasov, so they are going to be the first team in this bottom tier. St. Louis. St. Louis is a tough one, too. Binnington on his own is pretty inconsistent, and Joel Hofer can be too. But the peak of both of these guys is actually really, really high in my opinion. I don't think it's a great tandem, but I do think it belongs in this good tier. I think when they're both playing well, it's a top 10 tandem in my opinion, but when they're not, it's obviously not. So, again, a lot of it depends on just their consistency, who's hot, who's cold, whatever. But I think at its core, this does belong at least in the good tier, and when they're on their game, it can definitely propel up into these top two tiers. The Boston Bruins, they, of course, lose Linus Ullmark in the offseason. Swayman is yet to sign, though I would be shocked if he doesn't. And if that is the case, him signing is the case, Korpisalo will be the backup here with Brandon Bussey getting times. I'm sure whether it be to injury or just trying to get him some NHL ice. I think for now, Swayman was phenomenal both of the last 2 years. I think it has to go in great just because of Jeremy Swayman. And you guys will see this a lot. I know this is a tandem-based thing, but obviously goalies that have proven track records, of having very good numbers and very good results are going to be higher on the list, even if their backup is not all that great. And then systems like St. Louis, where the starter is good and the backup is pretty solid as well, obviously that helps the case as well. So Korpisalo obviously has not been all that good. Jeremy Swayman has been phenomenal, so I do think he is deserving alone of being in this great tier, and we'll see come the season how that sticks. The Montreal Canadiens, Sam Montembeault and Caden Primo, I think it's kind of a similar story to the Blackhawks here. I think they both had pretty solid seasons last year. The year prior was not so great, especially for Caden Primo, who had high expectations for a while and is kind of just coming to round into form to be at least a piece of what people expected of him. So last season was good progress for that. We'll see if that continues this year, and if it does, they at least belong in this fine tier. The Vancouver Canucks, this is an interesting one. At their peak, again, Thatcher Demko, when healthy, is probably a top 5 goalie in the NHL. Artur Shilovs will be taking over the backup duties when he's healthy. He proved in the playoffs he's capable of being a 1B guy in the NHL. That being said, I don't quite think that this group deserves to be in elite just because that fact that Shilovs is relatively unproven at the NHL level. I'm hesitant to keep them in elite just because of what he did in the playoffs. He was fine for Vancouver, don't get me wrong. but it's a very, very small sample size relative to a lot of the other goalies on this list. So Demko, of course, when healthy, phenomenal top 5 guy in the league, but I think Shelovs needs to prove himself a bit more, and Demko needs to prove that he can stay healthy for this to be bumped into the elite tier. The Washington Capitals this season running with the tandem of Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson, the first all-righty tandem I can really think of, and I'm pretty sure the only one in my lifetime. It's an interesting one, man. Charlie Lindgren was really good for Washington last year. He was the reason they made the playoffs. And Logan Thompson, when he's on his game, can be pretty solid as well. He was good for Vegas in the playoffs. There was a couple goals he probably wants back, but all in all, he's been pretty solid for them. Health is a big issue for Thompson especially, but for both of these guys at times. I do think I'm going to put it in good, and there's definitely some recency bias to this. Lindgren last year, again, was phenomenal. Prior to that, relatively unproven, despite the fact that he'd been in the league for a little bit. And Logan Thompson was on and off as the starter for Vegas, and of course, him and Hill both have been battling health issues, so they're probably the bottom of this good tier, if I had to guess, at least looking through the teams that I've not yet ranked, and they could end up being bumped down. We'll see how things shape out before the end of the video here, but I do think the Caps have a relatively strong tandem here going into the 24-25 season. New Jersey is a fresh tandem. They've had Jake Allen for a bit of time here, but they also get Jacob Markstrom, who, of course, when he is on his game, is not a top 5 goalie, but he can definitely approach it when he's really, really on top of things. This probably the polar opposite of the Caps. They're probably right at the top of the good tier. I do think at their peak, this is a top 10 tandem in the league, most likely. But obviously, Jacob Markstrom at his peak is not at the same level as someone like a Swayman or a Demko, at least as of now. Maybe a year or two ago, that'd be a different story, back when he threw up like 8 shutouts in the season or whatever. No longer quite that guy, still very capable of being a top 10 goalie if the situation is right, and I think in New Jersey that could very much be the case. So I have a lot of confidence in this group for New Jersey. I think it was a great move by their general manager, and I think it'll shape out well for them and should propel them into the playoffs pretty easily. I think Jake Allen is a more than capable backup for this team. The Anaheim Ducks, this is going to be the first one in the inconsistent tier. It's going to be John Gibson yet again, and Lucas Distal. Gibson been on the trade block for like forever now. And Lucas Distal last year finally had some really, really good stretches where he proved, or at least on the eye test, that he was about ready to be the starting guy for Anaheim. Of course, with Gibson still there, that's probably not going to be the case. I don't anticipate it being like a 50-30 split if Gibson's still there by the end of the season. But Distal is definitely approaching being ready to take over that role full-time. In the meantime, though, with Gibson there, it's hard to put this group anywhere above that, just because, A, you don't know who each of the guys are playing, and B, you don't entirely know what you're getting from either of them. Distal definitely still had some moments where he struggled, and Gibson obviously more often than not did find himself struggling. So I don't think this is a bad goaltending tandem, but it's the epitome of an inconsistent one, to say the least. The Calgary Flames, I feel bad because I love Dustin Wolf. I want to see the kid succeed, but for now this does belong in the bad section. He has been a fantastic AHL goalie, but in his limited action in the NHL, he's not been all that great until he proves otherwise. Dan Vladar alone is not enough of a reason to put these guys anywhere, but the bottom tier, I don't really think I need to spend too much time there. Not too different here. The Philadelphia Flyers, they're going to go right in this bad tier too. Obviously, the whole situation with Carter Hart and the Canadian issue last year leaves them with Sam Ersson, Ivan Fedotov, and Cal Peterson, who may have been bought out this offseason. I'm not 100% sure. Nonetheless, even if it is Fedotov and Ersson, this definitely belongs in the bad tier. Ersson gave this team everything he had last season, but he's frankly just not a NHL caliber starting goalie. He's frankly not that close to it, in my opinion. And Fedotov still needs time. He's still relatively fresh from the KHL. He's got a bit to work on to polish his game. He could very well be a starting goalie for Philadelphia, but for the time being, I'm just not quite there with them. So for now, they are going to stay in the bad tier as well. The Vegas Golden Knights, this is a really interesting one too. They move on, of course, from Logan Thompson, going with Aiden Hill as the starting guy, and they bring in Ilya Samsonov to serve as the backup here. Hill, of course, won them the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. On and off injury issues again last year. He, for a while, was like a Vezina frontrunner. in the first half of the year. Second half of the year, that fell off pretty quickly, and obviously health issues have been there again. So it's hard to really grade these guys. I don't think it's fair to put them near the bottom on the talent. Aiden Hill, when on his game, has proven that he can be a starting guy, but the health issues there are concerning for him. And then if it falls to Samsonov to be the main guy, if he does go down with an injury, we saw how that worked out for Toronto across various stretches this season. And Samsonov is the epitome of inconsistency. So I do think for now, these guys are going to go in the inconsistent tier as well. Again, kind of a mix here as a result of health and talent, but not overly confident in Vegas' goaltending situation heading into this season. On the flip side of that, a team that's got a pretty good depth in net is the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm hesitant to put them up in grade. I think I'll probably throw them in good for now. And again, I'm kind of just doing this on the fly, so I'm sure I'll be making adjustments at the end. But Freddie Anderson, again, when healthy, and that's been an issue for him throughout his entire career, is a very, very good goalie. He has moments where he struggles in the playoffs, but aside from that, when healthy, Freddie has been very good, especially the last 2 years in Carolina. His numbers have been unbelievable. And Pyotr Kochetkov, a young up-and-coming backup who's proven that he will eventually be the guy in Carolina, but while a player like Freddie Anderson is there, not necessarily going to be able to take over the net from him. But this is a really good group. As long as one of the two of them are healthy, they are probably pretty happy with either of them in net, I would imagine. And again, if they're both healthy, they have kind of a embarrassment of riches between the pipes with the two of those guys manning that job. Our first elite one is going to go to the New York Islanders, and I know Ilya Sorokin did not have the greatest season last year, but Semyon Varlamov did, and I'm very confident in Ilya Sorokin bouncing back this year. He is, on his game, a top 2 goalie in the league, in my opinion. And he's proven on multiple occasions to be able to take over games, take over stretches, and frankly has carried the Islanders across large portions of the last 3 to 4 seasons. So when he's on his game, again, maybe the number 1 goalie on the planet, and assuming he bounces back, I have no concerns for the goaltending on Long Island. Similar story here for the Winnipeg Jets. A bit of a caveat because they no longer have Laurent Brossoit. They've gone to Capo Kakkonen as the backup, and Eric Comrie was picked up there as well for like the 3rd time in his career. So it's Hellebuck, Kakkonen, Comrie. Hellebuck coming off the Vezina Trophy. Weaker backup options here in Winnipeg. However, Hellebuck has played on a less than 60 game pace like once over the last 5 or 6 seasons. I believe it was back in 2019. And obviously didn't play 60 in the COVID shortened season, but played well over a 60 game pace. So he's proven to be able to stay healthy, knock on wood, and when he's on his game, he's a top 5 goalie in the league as well, and it tends to lean to the higher end of that top 5, obviously. So very confident, of course, in Winnipeg's goaltending. That is far and away the biggest strong suit of that team. Large thanks to Connor Hellebuck for that, so they belong in the elite tier as well. The Los Angeles Kings. This is a tough one because Darcy Kemper, as I mentioned previously, he does pretty well when he's behind some structure, and behind teams that can score, and Washington was not really that. He struggled a lot in Washington, had some health issues, had a child, but previously in Colorado, health issues again, but had pretty solid numbers, and this Kings team is probably the most defensively sound team he'll play behind. It's a little bit of a shakeup from their roster last season, so I could be wrong there, but by and large, it's a pretty sound system. The backup, though, there, Dave Riddick, he actually had a decent year last year, but when it matters most, just doesn't seem to be able to find it, and he, of course, is not getting any younger. So I think it's probably fairest to put these guys in the inconsistent tier until we can get some, again, consistency, both in the health department and the game department from Darcy Kemper. If he can stay healthy and he proves to be pretty good behind the system, this could very well end up in the good tier. And again, Kemper's not getting any younger either, but he's not crazily far removed from being like one of the hottest commodities in the goaltending market when he moved from Arizona to Colorado. So he is in a much different system now, a couple years older, health issues have been there, we'll see what happens, but for now, I think keeping them in this inconsistent tier is probably fair. The Seattle Kraken, this is a really fascinating one, I think. Both Grubauer and Joey Daccord have had stretches over the last 2 years where they've been great and have had stretches where they have been very, very bad. And Grubauer has definitely had moments where he's been the worst of the two. Um, but when these guys are both on their game, it's like a sneaky good tandem. They are also the epitome of inconsistency, but I think because of the ceiling there, I am going to put them in this fine tier. Um, it's rare where they're both playing bad, so the good news for them is if Grubauer's off, they can go to Decord. If Decord is off, they can go to Grubauer. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping Seattle has a bounce back from last season. Obviously, made the playoffs, knocked out the Avs 2 years ago. Last year, really couldn't find the back of the net to save their lives, and the goaltending, again, a little bit on and off. So hopefully this season's a nice little rebound for them, and they're able to pick things back up, and hopefully Decord and Grubauer are a good piece of that. The Tampa Bay Lightning, another really interesting one. Vasilevsky, 2-3 years ago, easily regarded as the number one goalie in the world. He's now a year removed from back surgery. He did not look the same last year, and of course, it was the first year after it. So cutting him a little bit of slack there, but I actually think that I'm just putting the Tampa Bay Lightning in the good tier. Until Vasilevsky gets back at least closer to that form where he would just completely take over games, and not that there weren't instances of that last season still, but just over longer stretches of time, he was not nearly as consistent as he's been in years past. And they have one of, if not the worst backups in the league there in Jonas Johansson. His numbers did get a bit better as the season progressed, but they still weren't good by any means. And it's just one of those guys that really doesn't inspire confidence in the team in front of you when you have them in net. So I'm not a huge fan of the Lightning situation for now. They could go to make a move, but I think they have bigger fish to fry knowing that Vasilevsky's the starting guy as long as he's healthy. And they're still probably going to push to play him 60 to 65 games. Whether or not that's good for his longevity, obviously, you guys can decide that for yourselves. But for now, mostly due to the way he played last year, I am going to put Vasilevsky and the Tampa Bay Lightning in the good tier until he kind of proves that his health and his game is back to the level we expect it to be at, and then it'll probably be up in the great tier for the Bolts. The Leafs, this is another interesting one. Joseph Woll, relatively small sample size still, very young, but has had some pretty bright moments, and they picked up Anthony Stolarz in the offseason, who was one of the better, if not the best, statistically speaking, backup goalies in the league last season on Florida. That all being said, I can't validate putting them any higher than this fine tier. Joseph Woll, despite his age, has already had a slew of health issues, it seems like every damn year. And Anthony Stolarz, though he was good last year, has not always been that dominant of a guy, and a lot of his numbers last year, of course, attributed to being on the Stanley Cup winning Florida Panthers. So until that's proven to be something that he can continue long term, that it's not just something that was a result of the system they played, I'm not overly confident in propelling them up to the good tier just because of Stolarz and Wool's peak when he has trouble staying healthy, and Stolarz is unproven over long stretches as the number one guy if needed. The Edmonton Oilers, this is a weird one because Stu Skinner has proved to be pretty solid, but I'm just going to put them in the fine tier as well. I think speaking on the tandems, right, they're probably in line with these guys. I think Stu Skinner is at the point now where he probably belongs up in this good tier on his own, but Calvin Pickard's his backup, and his numbers are fine, but he's not getting any younger either. And if you watch Cal play, he doesn't it's a very different style than a lot of the goalies that are just coming up in the league or the guys that are kind of hitting their prime now. And I think it's much more exposable despite the fact that his numbers are okay because he plays on Edmonton. So I'm not a huge fan of that tandem. Again, they get boosted a lot because the Oilers score their way out of all of their problems. But as a whole, I think keeping them in this fine tier is probably appropriate. I'll probably catch some heat for this one. That's totally fine. I do like Stu Skinner as a goalie, but I just think the tandem doesn't really belong in this good tier just yet. The Florida Panthers, maintaining Sergei Bobrovsky as the starter, and after a brief stint in the AHL last season, Spencer Knight will be back up as the backup, and I do think Florida is probably the best team in this great tier, at least as of now, and there's a caveat there with Swayman signing and Demko's health, but having a 1-2 punch, again, of Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight is an embarrassment of riches of the greatest remarks. Sergei Bobrovsky absolutely turned up in both of the last two playoffs and has proved to be worth all $10 million of that $10 million contract now that the Cats have won a cup. And Spencer Knight, if he has kind of refound his game and gotten through all the personal issues he's gone through, he's still a pretty young kid as well, and a very, very highly touted prospect with a very high ceiling. So I really like this group for Florida. I think they're going to be in great shape in net. That's going to be probably their strongest suit aside from their top six being just ridiculous. Um, so I really like what they've got going on there. No concerns for the goaltending in Florida. Again, probably going to end up being the best team in this tier. These, by the way, are not in any specific order. That would take way too much time, and I do not have the brain power for that. The Pittsburgh Penguins, Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic, they're going to go right in this inconsistent tier here, too. It's so weird, man. Tristan Jarry's 2 years removed from being in the All-Star. I think it's 2 years removed from being in the All-Star game. Nedeljkovic, 2 years removed from just damn near taking over a season for the Carolina Hurricanes. And that just has not happened for either of these guys since at all. They show flashes where they've been very good. I remember a couple of games from Nedeljkovic specifically for the Penguins last season where he just took over and had 40-plus efforts and was phenomenal. And then the next game out, it would just be like really, really bad. And I'm imagining very frustrating for Penguins fans knowing that these guys both have it in them, but just can't do it on a day-by-day basis. So again, the ceiling for both of these guys, it's not a great ceiling. It's definitely not an elite ceiling, but when they're both on their game, this could be a good tier goaltending tandem, but they just cannot seem to do it consistently, and for that reason, they will stay in the inconsistent tier. The Nashville Predators, this is another elite one, no question. UC Saros just signing that extension. They pick up Scott Wedgwood to be the backup, and he was very, very good for Dallas in times when Ottinger was either injured or not playing that well. Putting him behind UC Saros is going to be scary. It's not Yaroslav Askarov by any means, but still a very good tandem. UC Saros is a workhorse. He will play 60-plus games, very similar to Connor Hellebuck. He has pretty much every year, or at least been on pace to every year, since he took over for Pekka Rinne. And in pretty much all of those seasons, he's been a top 5 goalie statistically, and if not statistically, he has picked up very quickly after slow starts. Another elite one, and I think this may be the last one for today, is the New York Rangers. Obviously, Igor Shesterkin, probably regarded as my number one goalie in the world right now. Again, I know Connor Hellebuck's coming off the Vezina, but I think just ceiling-wise and style of play and what results they get, Shesterkin has proven that he can and probably is the best goalie in the world. And Jonathan Quick found the fountain of youth last year. There was a moment where Shesterkin wasn't looking that great, kind of in the early to mid parts of the season, and Quick kind of took the net for a little bit, and he was very, very good again. It's a very strong Rangers team, so put a bit of an asterisk there if you so please, but this is still a really strong tandem in my opinion, and I have no concerns that Igor Shesterkin's going to continue to dominate the Eastern Conference as he has for the last really half decade at this point. And I'm sure that Quick will at least be serviceable, and if that's the case, they will still be in the elite tier. The Detroit Red Wings, the Steve Yzer plan, they got goalies this offseason. Ville Husso, Cam Talbot, Alex Lyon, Jack Campbell, Sebastian Cossa are all in this Detroit system. I think I don't know if it deserves Pat. I don't think it's at the same level as Philly, Calgary, and Columbus. I do think it's probably here, though. I think I'd take Skinner, I'd take Wool, I'd take Decord and Grubauer, I'd take Primo and Montembeault, and I'd take Mrazek and Brossoit over what they have going in Detroit right now. Ville Husso is 2 seasons removed from almost taking Jordan Binnington's job in St. Louis. Those days are long gone. He has not been good in Detroit. That contract is looking really, really rough. Alex Lyon almost pushed them to the playoffs the same way he did for the Florida Panthers 2 seasons ago. Cam Talbot is old and started really strong for LA last year. LA's system is vastly different from Detroit's system. Detroit's best defenseman is not signed yet, so that's another concern. I just don't have a lot of confidence in this group whatsoever, so they're going to stay in this inconsistent tier. Buffalo's a tough one, man. UPL had stretches last year where he looked rough, and then he finished the year as like the second best goalie statistically over the last 20-some games he played. Like, he was lights out to end the season. They, of course, have Devin Levi there in the minors, and I don't know whether he'll be the full-time backup or whether that'll be James Reimer's job and that he'll stay in the AHL, but I think they're just in fine for now. I can't put them up with these guys just yet. If UPL starts the year hot and stays consistent, they will be up here certainly, and they frankly could end up here depending on whether it's Reimer or Levi and how he or they look as a tandem. But for now, until UPL proves to be consistent, they have to stay here. When he's not been inconsistent enough that he belongs in the same level as these teams, but his peak is certainly much higher than the peak of some of the guys in here. The Ottawa Senators, so this is a tough one. I actually think that they probably go in the great tier, and I know people are going to be screaming just for me doing that, right? Linus Ullmark has had fantastic numbers. He won the Vezina 2 seasons ago, and again, I know he was on the Boston Bruins. I know it's a totally different system, structure, whatever you want to call it. However, people are also vastly underestimating what Anton Forsberg's capable of. This is a guy that in most teams would be a 1A for like all of the goalies except for the 4 here and probably these 3, right? Like any other goalie, they're splitting time 45, 38, 50, 32, whatever, right? Like it's not a starter and a backup with Anton Forsberg for most of these other teams. So that being said, Linus Ullmark, very, very good. Anton Forsberg, a very good backup. I really like what this team has in net for the first time in like a while, right? And again, Forsberg has to be consistent. That's been his issue over the last couple years is he has games where he's very good and then games where he struggles. But those games where he's good, the numbers are really, really good from him. And of course, Ullmark, the numbers speak for themselves. He's been on bad teams before in Buffalo, and his numbers there were good. He comes to Boston. His numbers are ridiculous because that team was ridiculous. He's going to do fine in Ottawa. I'm not overly concerned about it. He will have his stats bow down a bit. He's not going to be the Vezina winner in all likelihood. However, he will put up good numbers. Ottawa will be an improved team because of this tandem. The San Jose Sharks, as much as I would love to put them elsewhere, they are in the bad tier right now. My guess is it's going to be Blackwood and Askarov. I would think that's probably the most logical solution here. It could start the season Blackwood Vanacek, the old Jersey tandem with Askarov in the NHL, but I think they're going to try to start with Askarov in the NHL just to get him some ice time. I know that was part of the issue with having him leave Nashville was he wanted NHL ice time, and obviously them signing Scott Wedgwood and signing the extension for UC Saros, that just wasn't going to happen. So for now, it is still a bad tandem as much as I want to see them succeed, but a lot of this depends on which two are in net, kind of like where they grade out and how close to these other tiers they could get. But for now, still in probably the bottom of the bad tier if I had to suggest. The Dallas Stars. This is a tough one, man. Jake Oettinger again at his peak, top 5 goalie for sure, can be a workhorse. But last year he had some inconsistencies, and Casey DeSmith coming in as the backup, I don't love it. I think I'm actually going to put them in the gray tier, and I might be biting my tongue on this. This is probably the best tandem outside of Florida. Yeah, I mean, Oettinger, health issues, and over the last 2 seasons, in the regular season especially, has had moments where he has shined like crazy. He's been arguably the best goalie in the league, but he's also had moments where he's struggled pretty badly. And again, Wedgwood had parts of last season where he had to come in and be the guy, whether it was health related or performance related, and he did that pretty well. I don't know how much confidence I have in Casey DeSmith to do that. It didn't go that great in Vancouver when Demko went down. He didn't play terribly, but he wasn't great for them, and I'm concerned that if that same thing happens for Oettinger, the Stars are going to run into those same issues. So I am going to keep them just below the elite here for now, and I'm sure I'll catch some heat for that one as well. Down to the last 2 here, the Utah Hockey Club. This is an interesting one. Both Ingram and Vejmelka have been kind of up and down for a while. Ingram had a really, really solid year last year. He did kind of taper down at the end. And Vejmelka didn't have a great year, was phenomenal the year prior. But in both of those 2 seasons, he did fade out as well at the end of the year. They were facing a lot of shots. Let's not get anything twisted here. But I think it's probably in the fine tier for now. The sample size with Ingram is still relatively small. I do anticipate that he's the starter going into the season, but both of these guys are on thin ice, right? Like if either of them is really, really shaky, or if one of them just completely heats up, they will be the starter like this, right? Like it will not take a lot of time for one of these two guys to take over, and there's a good chance that there's stretches where they're both not that great because that's happened in both of the last 2 seasons for both of them. So we'll see what happens. I think their peak's actually relatively high. I've been doing a lot of like fantasy mock drafts, and Connor Ingram is going surprisingly high in a lot of them. I think a lot of people are really bullish on him, and I hope he succeeds because he's a hilarious dude, and I would love to see Utah finally have a goalie that can just kind of be the guy there because they haven't really had that since Mike Smith. But yeah, for now, Utah will stay in the fine tier, and the final one is a really tough one, the Minnesota Wild. Philip Gustafsson, Marc-Andre Fleury, and Jesper Wallstedt is kind of the honorable mention there. I have no clue where to put these guys at. Their peak, they're here. 2 seasons ago, Philip Gustafsson was phenomenal, but last year, it's probably here. Like, they were rough last year, and I think for now, this is probably where I'm going to keep them. Gustafsson, again, 2 years ago, was fantastic. His value skyrocketed. Last season, he was not at all. Fleury this is the last season of his career. He is 40 years old, I'm pretty sure, and last year was very on and off for him. And now you have a guy in the minors who's more than ready to come up and play NHL level hockey. He is probably the most ready of the young prospects between, him, Levi, Kosa. Askarov is arguably better right now, but between the two of them, I mean, I like Wallstedt more than Dustin Wolf right now, if I'm being completely honest. So you got a guy like that ready to play who's probably going to start the year still in the minors. It's a really, really interesting situation in Minnesota. I don't love it for them. I think if one of those guys starts off hot, it's great, of course, but someone needs to take the reins there because otherwise you're going to have a very, very frustrated Jesper Wallstedt sitting in an Iowa Wild jersey, wasting another year of his youth, which is not the worst thing. He's still very young as well, but all in all, you need more from at least one of Gustafsson or Fleury, ideally both of them. But that's going to be it for this one. I actually don't think I have to change anything. I'm just kind of combing back through this now. I think I'm happy with where I put everyone. Again, this is not in order from left to right or anything, so I don't have Buffalo over Utah or Carolina over Tampa Bay, nothing like that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'm going to go through probably forward cores and defense cores instead of going like position by position. I just don't really love doing that. Those will both probably be pretty tough to make. I don't think I've actually made either of those in the past couple years, so excited to get those done. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you want to. It's free. And yeah, we'll catch you guys soon. Thanks for watching.